Our focus for this session on plants is to think about the actual different types of plant tissues. So there are multiple types of plant tissues, and we'll look at three major tissue systems associated with plants. Those are dermal, vascular, and ground. So when we look at our plants, we actually will see these tissues throughout the entire plant. Remember, when we talk about structures of tissues, cells make up tissues, tissues make up organs, organs make up organ systems. We've already talked about organs associated with plants, being roots, stems, and leaves. Our job now is to determine what tissues make up those organs. In our three tissue types, I want to start with vascular tissue. This is one of the most critical tissues associated with photosynthesis and for moving all nutrients, waste around the plant. So we have two types of tissues associated with vascular tissue. Xylem tissue moves all of our water up from the roots to the rest of the plant. Xylem is also responsible for helping us to distribute any nutrients that the plant needs that it takes up from the soils, nitrogen, phosphorus, and so on. Phloem tissue always moves things down the plant. So xylem up, phloem down. So phloem is going to be primarily responsible for returning sugars to the plant that are produced in the leaves, either for use directly by the plant or for storage in the roots for later on. So if you look at this diagram, it's attempted to color code the tissues, the primary tissues of the plant. So the purple are the vascular tissues that we just talked about, xylem and phloem. We talk about these being in bundles, and if you can see in the top of this diagram, the lighter purple on the top is the xylem, and the lower portion on the bottom is the phloem. So we actually talk about these bundles. Xylem and phloem are always side by side. This will be very important when we talk about vascular tissue in more depth later. The ground tissue is all of the filling. We've mentioned this before. The yellow that's inside all of these tissues, or around the xylem and phloem, is all of this yellow. Those are ground tissue fillings. This is going to be important for storage. We'll see a lot of that ground tissue becomes full of sugars for storage. The other thing we have is dermal tissue. So just like you, dermal tissue lines all surfaces of the plant, from the roots and shoots and stems. So it's this skin, if you will, on the outside of the plant. We see it around the stems, around the outside of the roots. We actually see it on the insides of some of the roots to help protect, so there'll be a layer on the inside here. We'll see that more later with water transport. But those are the three basic tissue types that we deal with in plants. Now, if we look at it more up close with our cross section, we can distinguish these dicots and monocots that we mentioned in the categorization of plants. And you see from this image, these are both stems, please keep in mind. This will look different in roots. In stems, we see the vascular bundles surrounding the outside, and in the monocots, it's scattered throughout. So with those vascular bundles, we have to think about what that means for water transport. And as I mentioned, we'll talk about that later on. In roots, on the other hand, the dicot root and the monocot root, things look a little bit different to us. Remember, in our dicot root, that vascular tissue, or in our dicot stem, our vascular tissue are in those bundles around the outside, right? Okay, so if this is our stem. But in our monocot root, we now see a much more organized structure. We actually see the vascular bundles in a ring inside this root. When we saw it in the stem portion, remember, in our monocot, these bundles were scattered throughout. So you have to be careful with that as a defining characteristic, because in our stems and roots, these are going to look very different for us. In our dicot root, notice that the lighter tissue, that xylem, actually makes an X in the middle. See that? So that'll help you remember that the xylem is in the center, surrounded by the phloem. This will be important later on, but that X helps you remember xylem. If we actually take a cross-section of a leaf and consider the structures close up, we see the same things: dermal tissue, ground tissue, vascular tissue. Remember, a leaf is an organ, so it will be made up of all of these tissue types. And here you can see more close up that differentiation in color I was asking you about earlier, with the xylem and the phloem both being part of the vascular bundle in the leaf. This is actually what forms what we call veins on the leaves. Okay, those structures that you see on the surface of any leaf that look like ridges, these are the vascular bundles helping to move water and sugar around the plant. When we talked about photosynthesis, we talked about mesophyll. Mesophyll being ground tissue and helping us to supply nutrients and oxygen to our leaves as they do photosynthesis. So you see here, mesophyll is ground tissue, as we mentioned before, completely fills that leaf. The only other thing I want to point out here for you right now are these holes in the leaves. Do you remember what these were called? These holes allowed oxygen and carbon dioxide to move in and out of the plant. If you don't remember what those are called, you should go back and look that up. They are surrounded in guard cells, remember? But the hole itself has a specific name that you should recall.